Hard it would be if men entered life with the same views with which they leave it, or left it as they enter it. No hope, no undertaking, no regard to benevolence, no fear of disgrace, etc. Youth to be taught the piety of age, age to retain the honor of youth. This, it will be observed, is the sketch for number 196 of the Rambler. I shall gratify my readers with another specimen. Confederacies difficult. Why? Seldom in war a match for single persons, nor in peace. Therefore, kings make themselves absolute. Confederacies in learning. Every great work, the work of one. 3. Scholars' friendship like ladies. Scribebamus, etc. Martial, the apple of discord, the laurel of discord, the poverty of criticism, Swift's opinion of the power of 6 geniuses united, that union scarce possible, his remarks just, man a social, not steady nature, drawn to man by words, repelled by passions, orb drawn by attraction, repelled by centrifugal. Common danger unites by crushing other passions, but they return. Equality hinders compliance. Superiority produces insolence and envy. Too much regard in each to private interest. Too little. The mischiefs of private and exclusive societies. The fitness of social attraction diffused through the whole. Mischiefs of too partial love of our country. Contradiction of moral duties. Greek, oi philoi on philos. Each man moves upon his own center, and therefore repels others from too near a contact, though he may comply with some general laws. Of confederacy with superiors, everyone knows the inconvenience. With equals, no authority. Every man his own opinion, his own interest. Man and wife hardly united, scarce ever without children. Computation. If 2 to 1 against 2, how many against 5? If confederacies were easily, useless. Many oppresses many. If possible only to some, dangerous. Principium amicitias. Here we see the embryo of number 45 of The Adventurer, and it is a confirmation of what I shall presently have occasion to mention, that the papers in that collection marked T were written by Johnson. This scanty preparation of materials will not, however, much diminish our wonder at the extraordinary fertility of his mind, for the proportion which they bear to the number of essays which he wrote is very small, and it is remarkable that those for which he had made no preparation are as rich and highly fashioned as those for which the hints were lying by him. It is also to be observed that the papers formed from his hints are worked up with such strength and elegance that we almost lose sight of the hints, which become like drops in the bucket. Indeed, in several instances, he has made a very slender use of them, so that many of them remain still unapplied. Note: Sir John Hawkins has selected from this little collection of materials what he calls the rudiments of 2 of the papers of the Rambler, but he has not been able to read the manuscript distinctly. Thus he writes, page 266, Sailor's Fate Any Mansion, whereas the original is Sailor's Life My Aversion. He has also transcribed the unappropriated hints on Writers for Bread, in which he deciphers these notable passages, one in Latin, fatui non fame, instead of fami non fame, Johnson having in his mind what Thuanus says of the learned German antiquary and linguist Xylander, who, he tells us, lived in such poverty that he was supposed fami non fame scribere, and another in French, de gente de fat et affame à argent, instead of de goûter de fame, an old word for renommée, et affame d'argent. The manuscript being written in an exceedingly small hand, it is indeed very hard to read, but it would have been better to have left blanks than to write nonsense. End of note. As the Rambler was entirely the work of one man, there was, of course, such a uniformity in its texture as very much to exclude the charm of variety, and the grave and often solemn cast of thinking, which distinguished it from other periodical papers, made it, for some time, not generally liked. So slowly did this excellent work, of which 12 editions have now issued from the press, gain upon the world at large, that even in the closing number the author says, "I have never been much a favourite of the public." Yet, very soon after its commencement, there were who felt and acknowledged its uncommon excellence. Verses in its praise appeared in the newspapers, and the editor of the Gentleman's Magazine mentions in October his having received several letters to the same purpose from the learned. The Student, or Oxford and Cambridge Miscellany, in which Mr. Bonnell Thornton and Mr. Coleman were the principal writers, describes it as "a work that exceeds anything of the kind ever published in this kingdom, some of the spectators accepted, if indeed they may be accepted." And afterwards, "May the public favours crown his merits, and may not the English, under the auspicious reign of George the Second, neglect a man who, had he lived in the 1st century, would have been one of the greatest favourites of Augustus." This flattery of the monarch had no effect. It is too well known that the second George never was an Augustus to learning or genius. Johnson told me with an amiable fondness a little pleasing circumstance relative to this work. Mrs. Johnson, in whose judgment and taste he had great confidence, said to him after a few numbers of the Rambler had come out, "I thought very well of you before, but I did not imagine you could have written anything equal to this." Distant praise, from whatever quarter, is not so delightful as that of a wife whom a man loves and esteems. Her approbation may be said to come home to his bosom, and being so near, its effect is most sensible and permanent. Mr. James Elphinston, who has since published various works, and who was ever esteemed by Johnson as a worthy man, happened to be in Scotland while the Rambler was coming out in single papers at London. With a laudable zeal at once for the improvement of his countrymen and the reputation of his friend, he suggested and took the charge of an edition of those essays at Edinburgh, which followed progressively the London publication. The following letter, written at this time, though not dated, will show how much pleased Johnson was with this publication, and what kindness and regard he had for Mr. Elphinston. To Mr. James Elphinston. No date. Dear Sir, I cannot but confess the failures of my correspondence, but hope the same regard which you express for me on every other occasion will incline you to forgive me. I am often, very often, ill, and when I am well, am obliged to work, and, indeed, have never much used myself to punctuality. You are, however, not to make unkind inferences, when I forbear to reply to your kindness, for be assured, I never receive a letter from you without great pleasure, and a very warm sense of your generosity and friendship, which I heartily blame myself for not cultivating with more care. In this, as in many other cases, I go wrong, in opposition to conviction, for I think scarce any temporal good equally to be desired with the regard and familiarity of worthy men. I hope we shall be some time nearer to each other, and have a more ready way of pouring out our hearts. I am glad that you will find encouragement to proceed in your publication, and shall beg the favour of 6 more volumes to add to my former 6, when you can, with any convenience, send them me. Please to present a set, in my name, to Mr. Ruddiman, of whom I hear that his learning is not his highest excellence. I have transcribed the mottos and returned them, I hope not too late, of which I think many were very happily performed. Mr. Cave has put the last in the magazine, No. 631, in which I think he did well. I beg of you to write soon, and to write often, and to write long letters, which I hope in time to repay you, but you must be a patient creditor. I have, however, this of gratitude, that I think of you with regard, when I do not, perhaps, give the proofs which I ought of being, Sir, your most obliged and most humble servant, Samuel Johnson. This year he wrote to the same gentleman another letter, upon a mournful occasion.